the Hall of Justice, mutated by cosmic waste.
All right, we're back here at Talking Comics. We're here with Vivek Tiwary.
That's it. Perfect.
I got it right. I'm happy.
Thanks.
So we're here to talk about the Fifth Beatle.
Yeah.
The Brian Epstein story.
That's
correct?
it. Yeah.
So, people out there who don't know, tell us about what the Fifth Beatle is.
Yeah, so the Fifth Beatle is based on the life of Brian Epstein, who was the Beatles manager. Brian discovered the Beatles when they were not even the most popular band in Liverpool. They were a relatively popular Liverpool band, playing small clubs, playing the Cavern, playing the Casbah, and he had a real vision for them. He saw a band that could be beloved by the entire world, and he ran around saying, I think the Beatles are going to be bigger than Elvis, which at the time was a ludicrous thing to say. He was also gay and Jewish and from Liverpool. And in the 1960s, those were three significant obstacles. It was a felony to be gay. He would literally have been thrown in jail if his sexuality came to light. There was still quite a bit of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom. And finally, Liverpool was an important port town, but there was nothing cultural going on there. So for this gay Jewish man from Liverpool to run around saying, I found a local band and they're going to be bigger than Elvis, it was laughable. He was the ultimate outsider chasing what seemed to be an impossible dream. And obviously he was right. And every record label passed on them. So it was a dream that was very difficult to chase. So it's an incredibly inspiring story. It's also a sad story. He died at the age of 32, having brought the world a band whose message was all about love, and he died quite lonely, never having had a boyfriend himself. So it's an inspiring human story, it's a cautionary tale, and it's also a great Beatles story. It's an unknown Beatles story. For people who don't, a lot of the Brian Epstein story has never been told before. Much of my research was done through interviews. So if you're a Beatles fan, you're in for a special treat with some of the insider stories about what he did for the band. But it's not just a Beatles story. It's really an inspiring human story. For the way I put it is for anyone who's ever wanted to chase a dream.
Right. So are you a big Beatles fan yourself? How did you come to write the Fifth Beatle?
Yeah, I am a huge Beatles fan. I grew up listening to the Beatles. My parents were huge Beatles fans, and that's how I got my love of the Beatles. But really, it is Brian's story, and I discovered Brian's story 21 years ago when I was in business school, dreaming about being an entertainment entrepreneur. And I tend to be a little academic, so I thought if I am going to be an entertainment entrepreneur, I should study the lives of some of the great entertainment industry visionaries. I thought that the Beatles and Brian were the team that wrote and then rewrote the rules of the pop music business. So that's what led me to a study of Brian Epstein. Part of why I said I give the 21 years ago date is to point out that 21 years ago there was no Wikipedia, there was no YouTube, there were none of these online resources that we have today. And as an aside, a lot of those online resources are not. There's a lot of false information about Brian out there anyway. But 21 years ago, there was no information. There were and are no books about Brian Epstein in print. When the Fifth Beatle comes out on November 19th, it will be the only book, graphic novel or otherwise, about Brian in print. And so I was kind of stunned, where it's like, why is it that I can find a book about John Lennon's astrologist and I can't find a book about the guy that discovered and managed the band? So it became like this little mystery to piece together stuff about Brian Epstein. And what I did was I got my hands on every book that was related to the Beatles that I could find, and I began to pull out little clues, like who were the people that knew Brian the best? Well, there was Nat Weiss, who was his best friend and closest confidant and the Beatles' U.S. attorney. There was Sid Bernstein, who brought the band over to the United States and was Jewish and shared that connection with Brian. There was Joanne Newfield, who's now Joanne Peterson, who was his personal assistant and was one of the people who was there when they broke down the door and found Brian in his room having passed away. There were these folks, and then I said, who of these people are still alive? And I tracked them down, and I asked to interview them and talk to them. And I was just a young guy looking for business inspiration. A lot of them were a little wary at first,
Yeah, of course.
And then when they met me or spoke to me on the phone and realized how passionate I was and that I was really just trying to find more information about a guy whose life I was so inspired by, they eventually were very warm and welcome and open and willing to tell me amazing stories, and that's how I got my research done. Again, this was 21 years ago, so it was about 6 or 7 years ago after having produced A Raisin in the Sun on Broadway, and I was thinking, what's the next project I want to work on? What's the next story I want to tell? And I thought, it's the Brian Epstein story. It's the story that I've accumulated a preposterous amount of information about, and it's an untold story. And so I contacted all those folks again. And I said, I know when I first spoke to you, it was just about inspiration, about a guy that I wanted to learn more about. Well, now I want to tell the story. And they all said, great, and how else can we help? And if anyone's going to tell it, it should be you.
Right.
And so then I went about telling it. And when I first started to think about structure, the way the story came to me was in terms of color palette. It starts out in 1961 Liverpool, and it ends in 1967 London. Now, 1961 Liverpool, it's very dark, gray, rainy, industrial, a little depressing, if I may. And the way I thought of it was that it's very black and white. It ends in 1967 London, which is, we're about to have the Summer of Love. It's the dawn of the psychedelic era. It's very technicolor, if you will.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, poetically, I thought of it as the story of the movement from black and white to technicolor. And when you think about it in those terms, that's a graphic novel and a film. It's very visual, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I thought of doing it in those two mediums. And so we've been developing both. The graphic novel just took on a life of its own and is coming out, as you know, on November 19th, so that got finished first. So the film is an adaptation of the graphic novel, but I hasten to add, we've been thinking about the film ever since the early days of the graphic novel, so it's not one of these projects where we made a graphic novel in order to make a film.
Yeah.
You know, the two projects really do stand on their own, although the film is very much an adaptation of the book.
Right. So how did you end up coming together with Dark Horse?
Yeah, so Andrew, I found Andrew, and Andrew's perfect for the book. You've seen his artwork; it's amazing. And if you flip through it, you'll see that we didn't quite do black and white to Technicolor.
Right.
But some of these early pages, it's blacks, whites, grays, very muted.
Yeah.
Then Brian goes to the Cavern Club, and then all of a sudden we get a little burst of color.
Yeah.
And then we get more color. And then, we're left with more and more color. And then by the time you get to the end of the book, you're in this crazy Technicolor cartoon. So we really did do that. Not quite black and white to full color, but we played around with that.
I mean, it's stark, the difference between the beginning and the
Totally.
end. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Tell us about the artist. But tell us about Andrew.
You're asking about Dark Horse, too.
Yeah, but let's talk about Andrew first.
Okay, great, yeah.
First. How did you connect with Andrew? How did you, did you look at other artists? What was the process like?
So I grew up reading comics. I often say I probably learned to read by reading comics. So even though this was my first graphic novel as a writer, I was familiar with artists just as a fan, And I knew that picking the artist was going to be very critical. We needed to find somebody who, A, was going to be able to do this beautiful work that Andrew did, but also would be very collaborative because I'd never done a graphic novel before, and I wanted somebody who would be a little patient with me, if you will. So I'm on the board of directors for Valiant Entertainment, so I'm a big Valiant fan. And so through the folks at Valiant, I was introduced to a guy named Mark Irwin. Mark is an artist in his own right, but is also very well connected to other artists. So Mark came on board very early in the project to help me find an artist. Mark at the time was also Andrew's agent. And so Andrew was actually the first person Mark introduced me to. And Mark said, I'll introduce you to others if you like, but I think Andrew's going to be your guy. And he was. I mean, first of all, his work speaks for itself. But after meeting and sitting with Andrew, he's so passionate about this project, so emotional, so down to earth and laid back, very collaborative, very easy to work with in that respect. And so it became clear that he's the right guy for it. So Andrew jumped on board. I showed you a few of those very cartoony sequences. There is a 7-page sequence at the back of the book that pays homage to the old Beatles cartoons from the 1960s. And for this sequence, I wanted to hire another artist so that it would be a drastic change. And so I'm a New York guy, and I've known Kyle Baker for years. Kyle splits his time between New York and the West Coast these days, but he's a New York guy at heart. And so I've known him for years, and his cartoon style I thought would be perfect for this sequence. So I reached out to Kyle and I said, would you be willing to do this? And I had a feeling Kyle was a big Beatles fan, and sure enough, he was. He grew up with the old Beatles cartoons. And so Kyle said, I'd love to do it. So that's how I got Kyle and Andrew on board. And if you'd like, I can segue to your Dark Horse question, because there is a segue there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, my background is I've been working for myself for 15 years. But before that, I worked in the music industry, and I worked for major record labels, but I was always a big champion of DIY, of do-it-yourself. I always told bands, especially in this age of technology where with Pro Tools you can record an amazing demo in your basement, with the internet you can get it out there. I always tell bands, do it yourself. Don't wait for a record label to knock on your doors.
Yeah.
Build your own fan base, put out your own record, then let the record labels come to you. That's how you should do it.
Yeah.
In theater, where my main producing background is on Broadway, with Broadway shows, you don't have studios the way you do with films who invest in a slate of Broadway shows. Each show is its own business unit.
Right.
You raise money for each show independently. So each show is kind of like its own thing. So that's the world I come from. That's what I know. So with Fifth Beatle, it's like, let me raise the money and make the book. We'll do it independently, we'll do it on our own. That's how I'm used to doing business. So that's what I did. I raised the money, and Kyle, Andrew, and I set about doing it on our own. Now, we were about 20 pages in, and word got out that Andrew and Kyle were working on a Beatles book, and Andrew and Kyle are very well respected in the comic industry. The Beatles, obviously, anything Beatles will prick people's ears.
Absolutely.
And while I'd never done a book before, I produced Green Day's American Idiot, I produced The Addams Family, so I had some name recognition, if you will, within the entertainment industry.
People knew if they gave you money, it wasn't going to disappear.
I guess. I had some. So I had some name recognition.
Exactly,
I guess. So there was some trust that a project I worked on would happen. I guess. And so the publisher started calling us, and we were in this wonderful situation where we weren't looking for a deal, and people were calling us. And I met Michael Martins, Dark Horse's head of sales, at Book Expo here in New York about 4 years ago. And Michael said, "Oh, are you looking for a publisher?" And I said, "I'm actually not." And he said, "Well, I'd love to talk to my publisher, Mike Richardson, about this. He's a huge Beatles fan." And I said, "Sure, please talk to Mike." And it was a convention, so it ended on Sunday, and it might have been Monday or Tuesday. A couple days after, Michael called me and said, "Mike Richardson loves this project. He'd love to meet with you. He's flying to New York. Would you sit down with him?" And I said, "Of course." And Mike is a massive Beatles fan, and if you go to fifthbeatle.com under our partners page, you'll see a section that Mike Richardson wrote about why he cares about the Fifth Beatle, and it became very clear that Mike and all the folks he introduced me at Dark Horse were the right team for this.
Yeah.
The other publishers I sat down with were all great, but I have to say working with Dark Horse has been like working with family. They're all so wonderful, so easy to deal with. They're all passionate about this subject. So it became clear right off the bat that they were the right home for this.
Right.
So we signed with Dark Horse, but we were already, had already gotten started the book. So we finished it with them. And we've been working on it for 4 years, so it's it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And we're very excited that it's finally here.
Yeah, and before we started talking, and you guys are watching this or listening to this, on the page there should be, it should be embedded in the page, but it's just a trailer for the book.
Yeah.
What was the impetus behind creating a trailer for the book? And there's something special about the score, right? Yeah,
so the book trailer, we wanted to give a sense of the feelings, the emotion behind the book, the fact that it is a very filmic story. But with the trailer, we are making a film, which I'm sure we'll talk about later if you like, and the film is live action, it's not animated.
Right.
So I also didn't want the trailer to be animated per se, because I didn't want to give off the false impression that the film was going to be an animated film, and I also didn't want to give off the impression that we were doing a motion comic, because we're not.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of motion comics.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a challenge to capture movement and make the trailer dynamic, but also not make it look like a motion comic.
Yeah.
And I thought we would accomplish that in two ways. One is by working with an amazing animation company, and we worked with a company called Quality Transmedia and Double Barrel Motion Labs, and they're both amazing. And the second thing is through music. And so I hired, I worked with David Kahn, who's a longtime friend. It was weird to say I hired David. I solicited the help of my buddy David.
Yeah.
But David is also one of the world's great record producers. He's worked extensively with Paul McCartney. He's worked with Sean Lennon. He's got a lot of connections to Beatles camp. But he's also worked with everyone from Sublime to Fishbone. He's one of those guys who's worked with everyone. And so David Kahn composed a score specifically for our trailer, which you can see at fifthbeatle.com, or we'll be embedded in with the interview. And we're very proud of the trailer. I think it gives off a real sense of the emotion and the dynamism and the filmic nature of the book, while not looking like a motion comic.
Right,
so
yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the film. So why don't you give us the lowdown on what's going on with that?
Yeah, so we just announced a couple weeks ago that Bruce Cohen will be producing the film alongside myself. Bruce is amazing. I feel very proud and lucky to have him on board. Bruce is a 3-time Academy Award nominee and a winner, an Academy Award winner. He won for American Beauty. He also produced Milk and Silver Linings Playbook, which is the other 2 times he was nominated. And he also produced Big Fish for Tim Burton. He's incredible.
Right.
He also sits on he's the president of the American Foundation for Equal Rights. I'm not saying anything Bruce wouldn't tell you himself, but he is gay and Jewish, and so this project has a real emotional connection for him. I just feel that certainly his talent and his film resume alone would make Bruce perfect for the Fifth Beatle, but the fact that he has a personal connection to the story makes him part of the family. Everyone who's worked on this project has some personal connection to it.
Yeah.
So Bruce is amazing. And we're very thrilled to be able to announce that he's working on it. And the big film news is that we have secured the approval of the Beatles through Apple Corps, which has allowed us to do a deal with Sony ATV, who control the music publishing, which is a long-winded way of technically saying that we have access to Beatles music for the film.
Fantastic news, right?
Yeah, we are literally the first and to date only film about the Beatles to have secured their approval and Beatles music. There have been other Beatles films like Backbeat, Nowhere Boy, about the early days of John Lennon. If you go back and look at any of these films, none of them have Beatles music in it, and it's because they haven't gotten the approvals. So we're very, very proud of that. So our film will be full of Beatles music. It is adapted from the graphic novel, but obviously because we have music is something that, yes, there are scenes where we have lyrics and performance moments in the book, but in the film we can actually have those moments. In the film we can actually have those moments, so there's going to be a lot of music sequences in the film that you won't see in the book. And similarly, there's many scenes in the graphic novel that I think work on the page that don't work, wouldn't work on screen. So the graphic novel and the film will be very different from each other. But that being said, the film is an adaptation of the graphic novel, so I'm very, very excited about that.
So it's obviously a passion project for you. You've been working on it for 2 decades, basically, in some
researching
in some
it for 2
form or
decades,
another.
yeah.
How did you like writing a graphic novel, and is it something you want to do in the future? Or is it just because this was a passion thing for you and it's kind of on to the next?
I named my company Tiwary Entertainment Group, and I gave it that very vague name so we could take on a number of projects across the artistic disciplines. It was always my goal from the beginning of my company's inception to work in film, television, theater, graphic novels, music. I always wanted to do everything, and I grew up reading comics, as I said earlier. I think I said that earlier. So, I was thrilled to finally have a project that I thought this belongs as a graphic novel, So it's not as radical a shift as it might seem. A lot of times people are like, wow, what made you want to do a graphic novel? I've always wanted to do a graphic novel. So it's a long-winded way of saying like, yes, absolutely. I love the process. I love writing. I wrote the screenplay for the Fifth Beatle. I absolutely have a few other graphic novel ideas in mind. None of them are concrete enough to be worth talking about yet. Almost all of them are music-driven. Music is in my blood. I will say none of them are biographical. I've loved doing a biography with this Brian Epstein project, but I think my next one will be a little more fictional so that I can not have to worry quite so much about period. The nailing the period was a joyful but painstaking process. So I think my next one will have a lot of music in it, but will also allow me to take some more liberties, I suppose.
All right.
So yeah.
All right, great. So it's out on November 19th. How can people get their hands on it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I will plug it. It is already available for pre-order at Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and IndieBound. And there are 3 different editions of the book. All 3 are available for pre-order. There's a collector's edition. The standard edition is $19.99, and at Amazon, I think it's $15. So it's a steal, if you will. And the collector's edition, which is this edition here, is available for $49.99. It features a textured cover and 20 pages of bonus materials that include an art gallery from Andrew Robinson that show you his process. It's really lovely. And also over the years, many of the people that I met with about Brian, many of them have given me Brian Epstein memorabilia, so I've had a chance to put some of those into the book, including a Christmas card that his assistant Joanne gave his assistant Joanne. Nat Weiss, his best friend, gave me one of Brian's business cards. So the bonus materials are pretty lovely. And then there's also a limited edition version of the book that's on sale for $100, $99.99, and that is limited to 1,500 copies, signed and numbered, signed by myself and Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker. And also comes in a special slipcase. I can show that to you as well.
All right.
And they're all available right now. And if I can make one more plug, at fifthbeatle.com, you can get a wealth of other information. We have a mailing list there. We'll keep you posted on film news. So yeah, we're very excited about everything.
All right. Okay. Well, Vivek Tiwary, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
The Fifth Beatle hits shelves November 19th. And you guys should check it out. All right. So we'll be back.
Thank you so much.
With
Thanks,
more
guys.
on Talking Comics.
Talk Comics.